Well, I'm back where I was an hour or so ago, before the disaster, before the meter decided it would rather be somewhere else. Now I'm going to have a go at getting that meter cord correctly positioned again. This time I'll see if I can achieve it without losing my, without the meter coming adrift from the camera. Why it's taken me so long to get back to this stage was that I had to remove the prism, remove the base plate, remove the front of the camera, put all my meter cord back in position because it had popped off its pulleys, reset everything, check my distances again here to make sure that the focus was set, put the base plate back on, put the prism back on, and get back to this stage. So a disaster like that is a disaster. So I've got to get my cord positioned correctly. Bring the lower cord up over the top of the upper cord. Get the upper cord positioned through the slots. Bring the lower cord back down over the top. That's done. And that's what should have been like, what should have happened an hour or so ago. But unfortunately, I wiggled it the wrong way, the meter fell off the camera, and the rest, as they say, is history. So I'll put that temporary top cover back on there. I've got my meter set correctly now. I am going to check my focus again to make sure that everything has stayed where I expected it to stay since I've had the prism in and out, and hopefully it all went back in exactly the same position, but I've got to check my focus now and make sure that's right. So that's what I'm about to do. As soon as I've done that, I'll bring you back while I clean up the top cover. Right, I'll quickly clean up this top cover. The focus was correct, nothing had moved in my dismantling and reassembly, so that's all good. A little bit of dirt and so forth on this cover, nothing dramatic. The chrome is generally good. You may well have to set the frame counter to get that working correctly. Even if you're using the same cocking rack, if you've had the film advance mechanism apart, because the gear on the top of the film advance shaft has an odd number of teeth, there's a 3 out of 4 chance it didn't go back in exactly the same place it started off, and so the rest position for the cocking rack would be slightly different, and it would mean that the frame counter may not centre on the numbers correctly. That looks good. Clean the meter windows now, and I'll use some window cleaner to do that. The plastic is easily scratched. I mean, it's not in a stunning state here anyway. So you've got to be a bit cautious about doing this. This meter window is quite a little bit yellow coloured. I wonder whether it is the original material or whether it's been replaced with something else. It won't cause us any trouble anyway, so that looks good. Now, what have I got? I've got all the parts I want. I've got my button, but I'll need a spring for that. It isn't that one. So let me find my meter setter's setting button return spring, and we'll get that top cover on. Alright. Off with our temporary top cover. Check the rear finder, that's still clean. Meter's as clean as it's likely to be. Got my top cover here. I'm just going to clean the eyepiece lens. These are often quite marked. I don't know what people do to the outsides of them. That's good. That's all done. So we have a spring, return spring for the meter button. It sits in there. Let's wipe that meter dial, see if I can get it to look a little bit cleaner. It's probably as good as it's going to be. Our button. Make sure that's perched on the spring. Put our top cover in place. Now I'm holding this down with my fingers while I wind this. I want to watch the frame counter. It doesn't quite centre the number. Doesn't quite come far enough forward, so I want to lift that top cover off. That meter setting button certainly sticks in the middle of that window. It looks clean enough, the button. I'll scrape around the inside of that window, give a bit of clearance, I think. And I'll make an adjustment to the frame counter here so that it throws a little bit further forward. I don't think it needs much. Let me scrape around the inside of that meter setting button window. May have a rough part on the plastic. See how the button fits in there. Yeah, it's reluctant to go. It's like the hole's not very round. I'm just paring away a tiny amount of plastic with the scalpel to free this button up. That looks much better. Let's try that now. Yeah, that's free. Let's try this frame counter. Yes, that's good. That number's centered in there now. So that's good. That top cover can be fixed down in place. Just drop that pinhead screw in at the end. We have our chrome screw at the end of the top housing here. And two chrome screws that go in at this end of the top cover. Just looking at that, now that's a nickel plated one. Sometimes it's difficult to tell, particularly if the chrome's damaged, because the yellow of the brass showing through will change the apparent colour of it. So instead of the blue colour of the chrome, you see it's offset by the brass, and you see it like the more yellow colour of the nickel. Okay, we're at number 1. That part's good, so we'll tighten this screw up now. And on the top of the camera we want our rewind knob and the collar. There's the collar. The rewind knob just needs a quick wipe, I think. It's quite clean. Nothing untoward there. Spin that on. Something through the fork. Do that up with my fingers. That's it. So the top of the body's done, the bottom of the body's done. This camera just lacks its leatherettes and tidy up at the bottom of the camera, and so I will need to find some leatherettes for this. I have already replaced the whole back because the leatherette there was completely shot, so I need a front set and I need a base leatherette. Now the leatherette did come off the base of this in one piece, but it is covered in that very thick brown sticky adhesive, and I'm not sure how well I'm going to get on cleaning that up. I will attempt to, because I want to reuse as much as I possibly can, but I am by no means confident that that is going to be achievable. We shall see. In the meantime, I'll put the body aside. We have a working Retina Reflex S here. I'll put that in a bag to keep the dust off while I do the rest of the job. Well, this leatherette is really not very well. This white stuff I'm scraping off here is corrosion product. I'm also scraping back some of the adhesive, that's the shiny brown stuff. This has had different adhesives on it at different times. The heavy brown sticky adhesive that was so much a problem on the front leatherettes of this camera are not particularly in evidence here. This is something much more like shellac. It's brown, brittle, and scrapes away. Oops, that just broke. This adhesive, because it's so hard and brittle, will also be holding in the shape of the lumps and bumps from where the leatherette had set, and that effectively gluing this, fixing the leatherette in that shape that it had before. So we may never get this to lie as smooth as we normally would. The glue's been put on exceptionally thickly. I'll wipe this down with a bit of naphtha. Well, the underside of the leatherette has got as much texture as the textured side on the outside, really. It's that lumpy with adhesive. I'm going to pop that to one side. I've got to find leatherettes for the sides of the camera. If I come across a better piece on my donor camera than this, I'm going to use it. Well, I've got a piece of leatherette here from my container of used leatherette, and it's in better condition than the one that came off the base. By no means in stunning condition. But it will lie relatively flat because it's a little bit shrunken, a little bit dry, but it hasn't got that crusty, thick, brown layers of adhesive that the other one had. So I think this will be the one to go with. I think the surface can be improved by application of a bit of wax polish afterwards. Just making sure that it's all tucked down neatly and tight against the base plate. That looks pretty good. There's a rough spot just there. It must have had some damage at some stage. all of these leatherettes that I tend to be using they've all been recovered from some camera which was such a train wreck that it was condemned to be used for parts. Some of them I've just been given, as I've been given cameras, and sometimes I get given cameras in terrible states that people have pillaged for parts themselves, so they're only part of a camera, not an entire camera, and sometimes they're cameras that someone had attempted to repair and made such a mess of it that it was beyond salvaging once they'd finished. That looks quite good, and I've got a good piece of leatherette here for the front, for that side. That's quite a good piece. It's just missing a tiny edge at the corner there, which I can just cut something to fill that gap. But that's quite a good piece of leatherette. And the only one I've got lying around for this side is not quite so swish. It's got a crack on it, but I think that will glue back fine too. So I'll get these in place. I'll put a bit of polish on the base of this before I put the back catch release on there, or the film advance lever, because it's easier to deal with it while there's nothing on the leatherette. But first I've got to clean up these two pieces of leatherette and get them ready to put onto the camera. First I'll start with this left hand panel. Now this is quite dry. It's cracked along the corner where it runs round the bend, that sharp bend. That's not at all uncommon. It doesn't mean that the rest of the leatherette was in better shape. It just means that if it's going to crack, that's the place it will crack, because that's the area that will gain the most stress when you're trying to peel leatherettes off the camera. I can see it's quite dry, it doesn't lie particularly flat. Let's roll that round the body. Rather dirty looking, that leatherette. I hope it'll clean up sufficiently well. I'll try a little bit of dishwashing detergent and warm water on a cotton bud, and I'll swab that surface lightly with a damp cotton bud. See if I can lift out some of that dust and dirt. That's a lot better than no leatherette at all. That'll probably clean up quite well. Once that's all cleaned and dried, some wax polish will probably make it improve it greatly. The leatherette for this side's in quite good order by comparison, so I'll get that glued into place next. Just checking this leatherette before the glue hardens up or dries, just making sure that all the edges are tucked down firmly and are not curled up. It looks quite good in a dirty sort of a fashion. Right, get this one done next. This one I'm missing just a tiny corner, so I'm going to cut a patch out of something else to fill that once this is fixed in place. Just a little bit of damage down at the edge where this rolls around the corner of the body too, I see, but nothing too horrendous. A bit too much adhesive on here. Make sure I get good coverage to all the edges. And then wipe that excess off. You don't want liquid adhesive that can run down into the works. Let's position that leatherette. It's always fun getting them around that flash boss because they don't want to go there. Close that door. Just making sure the door doesn't pick up the edge of the leatherette at this end while I do that. And I can tuck this leatherette in along the hinge. And I can see cracks in the leatherette right on that edge. That's as I expected. That should be of no consequence once everything's fixed firmly down in place. That door picks up that leatherette as it comes across. That leatherette's obviously not tucked down well enough, and the door must be just a little bit tight. Alright, I'll cut a little patch for this little missing corner here, and I can probably cut that out of, or cut it off, some stray piece of leatherette that's too ugly to be otherwise reused. Over time you get better and better at reusing old leatherette, and you get less and less fussy about the shape of old leatherette. Here we go. That's because years ago, when parts were comparatively easier to find, it was less necessary to use damaged materials. I would imagine that some of the leatherette that I'm very happy to find and use now is leatherette that at a previous occasion I'd cut off a camera, removed from a camera and replaced with good stuff because I thought it was not good enough. Well, here's a scrap of leatherette that'll do nicely for me to cut a patch from. Make sure I get the grain in something roughly like the same pattern. We'll start by cutting off a little wedge. This by no means needs to be perfect. It just needs to be a lot better than nothing. That looks good. I'll cut that little fragment off. Let's see if that pushes into place correctly. Yeah, just a little bit wide at one end. I've just got to trim that very slightly. That'll work wonderfully. Now, trying to get glue onto a tiny little scrap of leatherette. Where is it? There's our patch. Let's flip that over and put some glue on the back of it. Now I'm stuck to the paper. I'll slide that little patch into here, pop it in position. That's job done. No one will ever know. So we've got leatherettes both sides of the front, leatherette on the base. And the leatherette on the back was coming loose at this part, wasn't it? So I think I'll run some adhesive down there and glue that back in place while we're here. Oh, so much sticky paper here, I'm sticking to everything. I've lost my toothpick. There's got to be another one. Yes. Right, so I need to apply some adhesive down here, and that's all the way along where that hinge line is. That shouldn't be too hard. And I'll do that by putting some on a piece of paper and transferring it in on a toothpick. And that wasn't as tidy as I'd hoped it would be. My poking and prodding toothpick I was using to pick up the edge of the leatherette with broke on me, and the glue covered the toothpick went back against the chrome trim. That should do. That looks good. Well, I think some warm water and some detergent, and see if I can clean that leatherette now would be in order.